Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The Views the News excludes. We have a special edition of the President's Podcast this week. I'm your host, John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Ohio Senate Republican Caucus in the President's Office, the majority. Chris Matheney is the Historic Site Manager with the Capitol Square Review and Advisory Board. He has forgotten more about Ohio history than you and I will ever know, and he gives wonderful tours along with the staff of the Ohio Statehouse. When you work here, sometimes you treat it like an office building, right? It's easy to get lost in this office because it's so large. However, this is also a lot like working in a museum. Chris, welcome.
Indeed. It is indeed. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you know, this time of year, we think about the choirs that are live streamed on the Ohio Channel. ohiochannel.org is really a valuable service to the state. And you can see high schools from across the state in their choir performances for Christmas time at the State House. When was Christmas sort of officially recognized or events came to the State House? Because if you compare the 21st century to 200 years ago, things were much different.
Right, and you know that's a question we get a lot. Is how did they celebrate Christmas at the Ohio Statehouse? And so much of it today is tied up with remembrances of or the influence of Charles Dickens, believe it or not. But for a long time in the state of Ohio, we didn't celebrate Christmas, and in fact, the very first holiday we celebrated was Thanksgiving, and that wasn't celebrated until 1841. There was a proclamation by the governor, who was Thomas Corwin at the time. We've got a wonderful article from the Carroll Free Press from November 12th, 1841, and there's this proclamation that Thomas Corwin, governor of the state of Ohio, to set apart Thursday, the second day of December next, as a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God throughout the state of Ohio. It is expected that on this day, all the good citizens of the state will abstain from the business of a temporal nature, that they will assemble themselves at their abodes and recognize the day. And that wasn't until 1841 when they did that.
And that also makes sense because at that time, and even today, Ohio, though, was much more of an agrarian type of an economy. And so you're thankful for the food that you can put on the table that will get you through the rest of the cold winter in Ohio.
Right. And it's interesting that it was 1841 that took place because, and we're all familiar with Charles Dickens, right? You know, you think of A Christmas Carol and Great Expectation, a variety of books that he wrote, but the timing is excellent because he was traveling through Ohio in 1841 at the same time, or rather 1842, a year later. And he had some descriptions of Ohio as he came through. Now, some people that know about Charles Dickens' 1842 visit know that he wasn't always complimentary of what he came
Was
across.
he on the naughty list?
He was on the naughty list at that time, but he had some good points. He was really upset with the notion of slavery in the United States. This is a time that
20 years before the Civil War.
Correct. And I should point out that he did come back in 1867, 2 years after the end of the war, and he was so much more complimentary when he came through with what he found. But we are lucky here in Ohio, if you're a Charles Dickens fan, because he took it easy on us. In fact, he traveled by stagecoach. And I've just got a quick quote in here about what he had to say about his trip. It said, "We reached Columbus shortly before 7 o'clock and stayed there to refresh that day and night, having excellent apartments in a very large, unfinished hotel called the Neal House." Yes. And John, you probably know the Neal House.
I do indeed.
Used to
I've been there, yeah.
sit across on High Street. It's where the Huntington building is now today. But it was a place where, heck, even the governors stayed there, any dignitaries that were, coming, legislators and so forth. The apartment, which were richly fitted with the polished wood of the black walnut and opened on a handsome portico. My notes go around the side of the page here. And stone veranda, like rooms in some Italian mansion. This is nice. The town is clean and pretty. This is Columbus. And of course, is going to be much larger. It is the seat of the state legislature of Ohio and lays claim in consequence to some consideration and importance.
Amazing.
So that's a favorable
Got
review.
here by stagecoach.
Right. And, you know, with that, I'll say he stayed at the Neal House Hotel. And there used to be all these hotels that went around Capitol Square. It's a much different place today. But
Lots of high rises.
lots of high rises, yeah. It's like everything, all the real estate goes up, up, up. But these hotels that used to wrap around Capitol Square, I mean, they did a killing in their time because of all the business that was taking place here.
And wasn't the State House the tallest building at the time?
Until the early 1900s, like 1906. We were knocked out by the one they call the 8 on the Square building here. Most people think it's a Levesque Tower, but that's like the 1920s. But there's one that the visitors to Columbus can see. It's the 8 on the Square. That's the one, that knocked us out. We get that question sometimes. Why isn't the State House the tallest building in Columbus? Because some cities, some countries will make sure that their capital is always the tallest building.
When was the State House finally completed?
1861.
1861.
Yeah. So, and when Charles Dickens came through, he would have seen the original State House here, the one that stood on the corner of State and High. It was that federal style building. You know, you come in, the front door, there's a room here, there's a room here, there's a room here, there's a room here. It's got a belfry on top. So he had that old federal style view. But he would have seen the construction of this building that we're in right now.
You know, it also, you think during that time, they were very thankful for what they had, and how did the and we have to keep in mind as well, during that day there were not 33 state senators, there were not 99 state representatives like we have today. We have a 132 member General Assembly. Back in that time, a dozen maybe? We didn't have 88 counties in Ohio.
Correct, right. So the representation was different. I know that my particular county, Fairfield County, I live just outside of Lancaster, Ohio. I believe they carved at least 3, maybe 4 counties out of that. So it has changed quite a bit.
Because it was still very close to the first settlement of the Northwest Territory, the establishment of Marietta. Chillicothe was a state capital for quite a while, is what I think Zanesville was as well,
Indeed,
wasn't it?
yes, Zanesville. I have cousins that live there, so we like to tease each other about that. I always like to tell them they knew that it went to Zanesville, that it wasn't going to stay. Because that's when they came up with that rule that the capital of Ohio can't be any more than 40 miles away from its geographic center.
Oh, I did not know that. So that was part of the revised code at the time then. Taking a tour here at the State House, I mean, anybody can come in during regular business hours. It's very easy. You can park in the parking garage or one of the many parking lots along the outside of the State House. It's an easy walk. You come through security, and then you can wander around here all day long. What's the value of taking a tour here by somebody who actually knows the history of this place like you?
I think that's it. And you know, in this day and age, we do like, you know, I sound like an old man, I'm sure, because we like the gizmos, and you know, that you can dial a number today too, and listen to a tour as you walk in. There's value in that, but I think it's the on-site with an individual that knows, especially if you've been here for years, you know what people want to see. And you can take them directly there. What they're going to want to hear is the real trick with that.
Where Lincoln stood?
Absolutely. Where he stood, where he danced, and ultimately where he lay in repose in the center of the rotunda. So I mean, there's all those stories. He was in the House chamber. We're very sure he was in the House chamber when he received word from the Electoral College that he was indeed the president-elect.
And the tour will take you to the House and the Senate chambers and all the way down to the ground level called the crypt. You'll be able to see the fossils still in the limestone of how the State House, the foundation of the State House. And a couple years ago, it's very much worth watching. Chris led a tour with one of our former state senators, Bill Coley, who shot it during the pandemic for a school classroom regarding Ohio history. And we got to go from the ground floor all the way up to the cupola. And that's only done during a certain time of the year.
Pretty much, yeah. It gets, the cupola you'll find, besides only being one way in and one way out, so there's all the codes that you, and it does, I should point out, it takes a legislative request to go there. So it was a good thing that Senator Coley came along for that particular part of the tour. But we don't control the temperature in the cupola. So for example, come June, usually by the second week of June, we will curtail all cupola tours just because of the heat. Sometimes we recorded temperatures of 110 degrees up there. So we have to be careful.
And you can read the history on the walls at the very top. How old are some of the signatures that are on the walls?
Well, the oldest signatures are the ones that were carved into the bench of the observation deck. This is the second floor of windows, so your podcast viewers will, when you think of the State House and the cupola, that second floor was considered the observation deck. And there is a carving in there of J. Cook, who carved his or her name in 1870. Now, there's got to be some that are older. That's just the oldest that we have found to date. But that particular floor has signatures on the walls all the way around.
Speaking of the cupola, didn't you write a book that involved the cupola regarding the history of the State House? What's it called?
It's called Cornerstone to Cupola. And the point of that whole title is just simply from what could be arguably the oldest part of the State House, the cornerstone that was laid on July 4th, 1839, to the cupola, which really was one of the last few things that was finished up. In fact, that observation deck was finished up in 1858. So the idea with the book is you kind of get the whole story of the construction and the different, made use of newspaper articles from the time. A lot of the drawings, and this comes too from guys that had done research well before me. There were 5 different architects who worked on the State House, and one of them, a gentleman named Nathan Kelly, who had some of the largest and longest influence on the State House, was fired from the project back in the 1850s, and when he left, he took his drawings. So they're not available.
He took his ball and went home.
Yeah.
He took the blueprints
He was
at
upset.
the time and said, we're done.
We are done.
Well, you know, we're sitting outside of the Senate chamber, and of course the State House is decorated for the holidays. And we're in front of one of the Christmas trees outside of the Senate chamber. There's also one on the other side of the hall across the rotunda and outside the House chamber. And then the State House is always lit beautifully during this time of year. The Christmas spirit is alive and well here in the Ohio State House. When did the Christmas spirit really come around? You talked about Governor Corwin and the Thanksgiving proclamation, but how far in did we actually start having festivities that were linked to Christmas and those holidays?
Right, good question. And the best answer to that is 1857. That's how long it took, really. In 1857, the state officially recognized Christmas as a holiday. Prior to that, legislators would quite possibly meet on December 25th here at the Ohio Statehouse. And again, this brings me back to Dickens and all that stuff, because we like to think, today, we like to think of
Marley
all
and
those,
Company back then, huh?
Right. It did have its influence. It really did have its influence. But to me, and you know, come January, I will have spent 30 years in this building. And
thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. I am your historian.
Well, and so often I always enjoyed Ohio history in grade school and high school, and it seems to me that today's generation, and I could be wrong, and this might just be something that tells you that I'm an old guy, but it seems like often history is lost on our younger generation.
Yeah, I feel that sometimes, but you're right to call out that old man status, and
Yeah.
I have to remind myself of that, because when I work with the students that are coming in, you will see the ones who want to be historians or are, get their history nerd on by hearing what was going on, and they'll ask you the questions, and so you're pleasantly surprised by it. But yes, sometimes when you go on the internet, then you see those questions like, when did the American Civil War end? Only 17% can answer this question. How is that possible?
Right.
How do we not know that the American Civil War took place? And hundreds of thousands of Americans died.
Right.
In that, how do we not know that? So I'm astonished by that, but I give that like a 50-50 in my opinion. Really?
There are still interested young minds out
there. There are, and I see them.
Back to as I was jokingly saying, was almost like Marley and Company around here, and not until what time do you say it was when they started again?
1857.
57.
And I find that the date is so interesting. It's just a theory.
Okay.
In that same year of 1857. Now, you asked me earlier, when was the Statehouse complete?
Right.
Completed in 1861. But by 1857, it was far enough along that the legislative branch and the executive branch both moved in, and the Supreme Court wasn't. At one point, we had all three branches of government here. And they held a celebration, the Capitol Festival, they called it, or Statehouse Jubilee. And they chose January 6th, 1857. Now, January 6th, there's some debate about what it means, but most people know that as Epiphany or Twelfth Night. And in the Christian belief, I'm an old Methodist man myself. In the Christian belief, it refers to that time when the three wise men came and visited the baby Jesus in the manger in Bethlehem. It's also the time, depending on what you read, that Joseph was being visited by the angels. This is all, in the Christian religion. But January 6th, depending on, and some people say it's January 5th, depending on how you count, but January 6th is Epiphany. They chose that date. Now, Twelfth Night, especially in Europe, had been celebrated a long time, sort of the end of the Christmas season. And some people believe if you don't take your Christmas tree down by January 6th, that it's bad luck. But you also have to leave it up, too, for, as you said, we're agrarian, so for the crops for the coming year, that's sort of a, but the 6th it's interesting that they chose that particular date, January 6th, 1857, and they had a huge celebration here. Salmon Chase was the governor at the time. Chase was a rival with Lincoln for the nomination for Republican president that year. Lincoln took him with him to Washington, made him Secretary of the Treasury, and eventually Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But they held a big celebration here. And I've got some descriptions from the time period, if you'd like to hear some of the things. Let's see, the people began gathering at an early hour, and by 6:30 in the evening, the pressure at all entrances was so great that both strength and shrewdness were required to get inside the grounds. On the Capitol steps and at the door of the west entrance, the jam was equally as great. Many of the women were nearly fainted, and of course, their hoop skirts were flattened into anything but spheres. Even Governor Chase, who was to deliver an address at 7:30, was unable to push his way inside till nearly 9 o'clock.
And how was the facility lit?
All right, that's an excellent.
Was that gaslighting yet at the time?
It was gaslit. It was gaslit. Let's see, the Capitol during the day, here I've got a nice little copy of the Citizen Journal that we put together some time ago. Let's see, the Capitol during the day had been prepared to accommodate the people. The chairs were removed from the halls of the Senate and the House. The rotunda was handsomely decorated with tricolored muslin and evergreens. You got to understand those that they could see. You got to understand that at that time in 1857, the rotunda was filled with scaffolding, for they still weren't finished yet. In fact, that scaffolding didn't get removed until June of 1860. And it was in that time that they started to lay that very floor that's down there in place. Tricolored muslin. These we could see. The tables were placed in a semicircle in the rotunda, but those we never got a glimpse of. They were surrounded all the evening with a cordon of hungry men and women, which to us was as impenetrable as a Macedonian phalanx. We could hear the clatter of dishes, and we imagined the air was favored with an effluvia of stewed oysters and cold ham.
That actually sounds good.
Oh, do you like oysters?
I do. I like them fried.
Listen to
oyster
what
stuffing.
Yeah, the Macedonian phalanx. Listen to what was. Got a list here of all of the food. Thought I did. A list of all the food that
And you wonder too. I mean, how was this place heated at that? Were there working fireplaces that were open when the public could come in for these events? Boilers down in the crypt. That same architect I told you about, Nathan Kelly, he designed the first heating system. And basically there were 4 large boilers down on the ground floor of the State House, and they were connected to 18 air chambers around the building. So it was, forced air, basically. And so in the chambers and the different rooms, there were vents to allow the heated air to rise. And he put in 2 ventilation stacks, still visible today on the State House on the east side, to carry away the waste gas and steam. And we have a newspaper account from February of 1856, 5 years before the building was complete, that said the temperature of the State House, and in particular the House chamber, rose to a comfortable 60 degrees. That's remarkable for that time. That really is remarkable.
That's not too bad.
20.
Listen to this list of some of the things. Okay, while the speeches were going on, and there's a lot of speechifying going on at that time about this wonderful State House. While they were going on the House chamber, the hall of the Senate was given over to music and dancing the cotillion. At which time, said the Journal, there must have been 8,000 people in the building. By far the most popular spot, however, was the rotunda, where tables full of food were spread for the guests. The provisions, we are told, included 1,600 loaves of bread, 15 barrels of crackers, 900 pounds of butter. What are they doing with all that butter? 4 barrels of crushed sugar, 24 barrels of milk, 300 turkeys, 125 hams, and 1,000 gallons of oysters. And again, that quote about surrounded by a cordon of hungry men and women.
What a wonderful celebration. At that time, you think about it, no social media, no email, and when people could get together for a gathering of that, it was really an event to be part of.
It was indeed. It was indeed. And in fact, they had tickets for this affair. We are lucky to have one in our collections. You can see a copy of it down in the governor's hallway, or right outside the Grant hearing room down below us, complete with a bust of Salmon Chase, who had some comments about that particular day. Ladies were encouraged to attend, but the custom of the time, they must be accompanied by a gentleman. They had rules about carriages will enter the Capitol grounds at the northwest gate, corner at High and Broad Streets, and after depositing their occupants at the west entrance of the Capitol, drive out at the south gate opposite the post office on State Street. That building still stands. Guests, not in carriages, will enter the grounds through the door of the old office of the Secretary of State on High Street, showing their tickets only, and enter the Capitol by the west entrance, the front porch, giving up their tickets of admission to the doorkeepers. And again, ladies to be admitted must be accompanied by a gentleman at the time. And you know what? 3 o'clock in the morning, the company in the south side of the building had dispersed, but the crowd in the north side continued dancing and merrymaking until 6 a.m., when the festivities gradually petered out. There were few who dared pronounce the whole festival anything less than a huge success, while the newspapers report that among the host of visitors from all over the state, the praise of their new State House had been universal. And you know, really, John, the truth is, it wasn't until you could say that it was Thomas Edison's light bulb, the electric light. It's at the turn of the century. I think in the 1880s, you got the first string of Christmas lights being put together.
And we think today about Governor DeWine and the Ohio governors of the modern era and the Christmas tree lighting that's
Right.
held in the atrium.
Right, right. And it used to be outside for a long time, the tree lighting. I've got a not so old picture here to show you. You can see the trees lit out in front of the Ohio Statehouse. And in 2013 is when we started bringing the celebration inside. And I can remember some of those old outside. You've been around a long time
I have
too,
been
John. You
around
remember
a long
those?
time.
I can remember certainly Governor Taft's tree lighting, Governor Voinovich's tree lighting.
Carried them live
Right.
on television.
I think I even got to bring Stinger, the mascot for the
Blue
Blue
Jackets.
Jackets out at one point.
Well, we really appreciate your time. Chris Matheney, the Historic Site Manager for the Capitol Square Review and Advisory Board, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you. And if you ever get a chance to come to the Ohio Statehouse, please do and take a guided tour with Chris and his staff. Thanks for your time.